It was a chilly Monday morning in the heart of Chicago. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, filled with honking cars, bustling crowds, and the distant hum of conversations blending into the background noise. People hurried along the sidewalks, clutching coffee cups or scrolling through their phones as they made their way to work or school. Among them was Margaret Wilson, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair neatly tucked under a woolen hat. She walked, slowly but steadily, her cane tapping lightly against the pavement. Her face showed signs of age, but her eyes sparkled with warmth and kindness. Margaret had spent the early hours of the day visiting her granddaughter at the hospital. It wasn't anything serious, just a minor surgery. But Margaret wanted to be there for support. Now she was heading home on the bus, carrying a small bag of groceries and holding tightly onto her purse. For Margaret, mornings like these were peaceful. They gave her time to think, reflect, and enjoy the little moments that life offered. She liked watching people go about their routines, imagining what their lives might be like. As she approached the bus stop, she noticed a group of teenagers laughing loudly, their backpacks slung carelessly over their shoulders. A man in a business suit paced impatiently, checking his watch every few seconds. And then there was another figure. A tall man wearing a hoodie and jeans, standing quietly by himself. He kept his head down, occasionally glancing at his phone. Something about him seemed familiar, though Margaret couldn't quite place it. When the bus arrived, everyone shuffled aboard, jostling for space as they paid their fares and found seats. Margaret took a spot near the window, grateful for the chance to rest her legs. The man in the hoodie followed her, sitting down beside her without a word. He didn't look up, instead keeping his focus on his phone. Margaret glanced at him briefly, before turning her attention to the world outside the window. The streets of Chicago passed by in a blur of gray buildings and colorful storefronts. It was comforting in a way, the familiarity of it all. The bus wasn't particularly crowded, but it wasn't empty either. There were a handful of passengers scattered throughout. A mother trying to calm her fussy toddler, an elderly man reading a newspaper, and a young woman listening to music with her headphones on. Everything seemed normal, at least for now. Further, down the aisle, a new passenger boarded the bus. His entrance was unmistakable. Dressed in a black leather jacket covered in patches, he had a rugged appearance that immediately drew attention. His arms were covered in tattoos and his boots thudded heavily against the floor as he moved. This was Jake Malone, a name no one on the bus knew yet, but one that would soon leave a lasting impression. Jake's demeanor was intense. He scanned the interior of the bus with sharp, calculating eyes, as if sizing up everyone around him. Some passengers instinctively looked away, avoiding eye contact. Others pretended not to notice him at all, burying themselves deeper into their books or phones. Jake muttered something under his breath, though no one could hear what he said. Whatever it was, it didn't sound pleasant. He moved toward the back of the bus, gripping the overhead rail tightly as the vehicle rocked gently from side to side. As he passed rows of seated passengers, his gaze lingered on certain individuals longer than others. One of those individuals was Margaret. At first glance, she seemed unremarkable, an older woman minding her own business. But then Jake noticed something that caught his interest. Around her neck hung a delicate gold necklace, its chain glinting faintly in the sunlight streaming through the window. It wasn't flashy or expensive looking, but it had a quiet elegance to it. To Jake, it stood out like a beacon. For reasons known only to him, Jake felt drawn to the necklace. Maybe it reminded him of something from his past, or maybe he simply saw it as an opportunity. Either way, he decided to act. Slowly, deliberately, he began making his way toward Margaret's seat. The other passengers barely registered his movement, too absorbed in their own worlds to pay much attention. Margaret, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the danger approaching her. She continued to gaze out the window, lost in thought. Occasionally, she adjusted her scarf or shifted slightly in her seat to get more comfortable. Beside her, the man in the hoodie sat silently, still focused on his phone. Neither of them noticed, Jake until he was right behind them. The atmosphere on the bus shifted subtly. The laughter of the teenagers grew quieter, almost hesitant. The mother stopped humming to her child. Even the driver seemed to sense that something was off, glancing at the rear-view mirror more frequently. Tension crackled in the air, invisible, but palpable. And yet Margaret remained oblivious, completely unaware that her quiet morning commute was about to take a dramatic turn. Unbeknownst to anyone, including Jake, fate had already placed an unexpected variable into the equation. Sitting mere inches away from Margaret, hidden beneath his unassuming hoodie, was none other than John Cena. Though he tried to blend in with the crowd, his presence carried an undeniable weight. Years of training and experience had taught him how to remain calm under pressure, how to assess situations quickly and decisively. Right now, however, he was content to stay in the background, observing the world around him with quiet curiosity. But as Jake closed the distance between himself and Margaret, John's instincts began to kick in. Something about the man's body language set off alarm bells in his mind. He didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but he knew it wouldn't be good. Subtly, he shifted his position, angling himself slightly so he could keep an eye on both Jake and Margaret. His fingers tightened imperceptibly around his phone, ready to spring into action if necessary. Outside, the cityscape continued to roll by, oblivious to the brewing storm inside the bus. Inside, however, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change the lives of everyone involved. All it would take was one wrong move, one moment of recklessness, and everything would spiral out of control. And yet, amidst the tension and uncertainty, there was also hope. Hope that someone brave enough would step forward to protect the vulnerable. Hope that even in a world often dominated by fear and selfishness, acts of courage and kindness could still shine through. Little did anyone know that hope would soon take the form of a man who had dedicated his life to inspiring others, even if they didn't recognize him at first glance. Jake Malone finally reached Margaret's seat, his heavy boots stopping just inches away. He stood there for a moment, towering over her with an air of intimidation. His eyes locked onto the gold necklace around her neck, and a smirk crept across his face. It was clear what he wanted, but no one dared to say anything. The other passengers exchanged nervous glances, their unease growing with each passing second. Margaret, still gazing out the window, felt a shadow fall over her. She turned, her head slightly, and saw Jake standing there, his arms crossed and his expression hard. For a brief moment, she thought maybe he was just waiting for someone to move so he could take a seat. But then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "That necklace," he said, pointing at her chest. "Give it to me." Margaret froze, her heart skipping a beat. She instinctively reached up to touch the delicate chain as if shielding it from him. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What did you say?" Jake didn't repeat himself. Instead, he leaned down closer, his face only a few inches from hers. "You heard me," he growled. "Hand it over, now." His tone left no room for argument, and the threat in his words sent a chill down Margaret's spine. The bus seemed to grow quieter, the usual hum of conversations fading into silence. Everyone watched, paralyzed by fear or curiosity. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others looked away, pretending not to notice. No one stepped forward to help. Even the driver, who had been glancing at the rearview mirror, seemed hesitant to intervene. Beside Margaret, the man in the hoodie, John Cena, finally looked up from his phone. He had been keeping an eye on Jake ever since the biker started, moving toward them. And now he sat up straighter, his muscles tensing beneath his casual clothing. John wasn't sure what Jake intended to do, but he knew it wouldn't end well if someone didn't stop him. Margaret clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles turning white. "Please," she begged, her voice shaking. "This necklace means a lot to me. It belonged to my late husband. I can't give it to you." Jake's smirk disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, old lady," he snapped. Then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed the chain, yanking it roughly. Margaret gasped in pain and surprise, her hand flying to her neck. The necklace didn't break. It was sturdy, but Jake's grip was strong, and he began pulling. "Harder! Stop it!" Margaret cried, tears welling up in her eyes. She tried to pull away, but Jake was too strong. Her cane fell to the floor with a clatter, drawing even more attention from the other passengers. Still, no one moved to help her. They were frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. John Cena couldn't stay silent any longer. He placed a firm hand on Jake's wrist, stopping him mid-pull. "Let go of her," John said, his voice calm but commanding. Jake turned his head sharply, glaring at the stranger who had dared to interfere. For a moment, neither man said anything. The tension between them was electric, filling the bus with an almost suffocating heaviness. "What's your problem?" Jake sneered, his voice dripping with hostility. "Mind your own business." John didn't flinch. He met Jake's glare with steady, unwavering eyes. "This is my business," he replied. "Now let go of her." Jake hesitated, clearly taken aback by John's confidence. Most people would have backed down when faced with someone like Jake. Someone big, intimidating, and clearly unafraid to use force. But John wasn't most people. Years of training and discipline had taught him how to handle situations like this, and he wasn't about to let Jake hurt an innocent woman. For a moment, it looked like Jake might comply. He loosened his grip slightly, his brow furrowing as he studied John's face. Then suddenly his expression darkened and he tightened his hold on the necklace again. "Back off," he warned, his voice rising. "Or you'll regret it." Margaret whimpered softly, her hands shaking as she tried to pry Jake's fingers off the chain. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and her breathing grew ragged. "Please," she whispered, looking pleadingly at John. "Help me." John didn't need to hear another word. With a swift motion, he wrapped his fingers around Jake's wrist and applied just enough pressure to make the biker release his grip. Jake stumbled back, startled by the sudden resistance. "What the hell?" he exclaimed, rubbing his wrist, where John's fingers had been moments before. The other passengers watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. Some looked relieved that someone had finally stepped in, while others braced themselves for the inevitable explosion. Jake wasn't the type to back down easily, and everyone knew it. "You're making a mistake," Jake muttered, his voice low and dangerous. He took a step closer to John, squaring his shoulders and puffing out his chest. Despite his tough exterior, however, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Something about John's presence unnerved him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. John stood his ground, his posture relaxed but alert. He wasn't trying to provoke Jake, but he also wasn't backing down. "I don't want any trouble," he said evenly. "But if you keep harassing this woman, I won't have a choice." Jake clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He glanced at Margaret, who was clutching her chest and sobbing quietly, then back at John. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he knew it. Still, his pride wouldn't let him walk away. Not yet. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Jake spat, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Go ahead, tough guy. Make my day." John didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on Margaret, gently picking up her cane from the floor and handing it to her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his tone full of concern. Margaret nodded weakly, though her hands were still trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake watched the exchange, his frustration mounting. To him, it felt like everyone on the bus was ganging up on him, even though no one had actually done anything. The weight of their stares, combined with John's unwavering composure, made him feel cornered. And when Jake felt cornered, he lashed out. With a snarl, he lunged forward, aiming a punch at John's face. The movement was fast, fueled by anger and adrenaline, but John was faster. He sidestepped effortlessly, dodging the blow with practiced ease. Before Jake could recover, John grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, pinning him against the bus railing. The entire bus fell silent except for Jake's muffled curses. "Listen carefully," John murmured, his voice low and steady. "If I ever see you harassing anyone again, I won't be this nice." Jake struggled briefly, trying to break free, but John's grip was ironclad. After a few seconds, he stopped fighting, realizing he was no match for the man restraining him. Defeated and humiliated, Jake muttered something under his breath. John released him slowly, stepping back to give him space. Jake straightened up, shooting daggers at John with his eyes. "Whatever," he growled, brushing past him and heading toward the front of the bus. As Jake stormed off, the tension in the air began to dissipate. The other passengers exhaled collectively, some whispering among themselves while others simply stared in awe. Margaret wiped her tears and smiled weakly at John. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger this time. "You saved me." John nodded modestly. "Just doing the right thing," he replied. A young woman sitting nearby leaned forward, her eyes wide with recognition. "Are you John Cena?" she asked hesitantly. John chuckled and gave a slight nod, prompting a round of applause from the passengers. Margaret, however, remained focused on her savior. "I've seen you wrestle, on TV," she admitted. "Never thought I'd meet you like this, though." John smiled warmly. "Well, I'm glad I could help," he said. As the bus continued its journey, the atmosphere lightened considerably. Strangers exchanged smiles, grateful for the reminder that kindness still existed in the world. And for Margaret, it was a morning she would never forget. The day a wrestling legend became a real-life hero. Jake Malone stumbled off the bus at the next stop, his pride bruised and his temper simmering just below the surface. He shot one last glare at John Cena before stepping onto the sidewalk, muttering curses under his breath. The doors of the bus closed behind him with a hiss, leaving the passengers to breathe a collective sigh of relief. For many, it felt like a weight had been lifted, like they could finally relax after holding their breath for what felt like an eternity. Inside the bus, the mood began to shift. The initial shock of the confrontation gave way to murmurs of gratitude and admiration. People who had been too afraid to speak up earlier now found their voices praising John for his bravery. Margaret Wilson, still clutching her necklace tightly, turned to him with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You didn't have to do that, but you did." John smiled, gently, shaking his head. "It's nothing," he replied. "Anyone would have done the same." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Many people had witnessed Jake's aggression and chosen to stay silent, either out of fear or indifference. It wasn't their fault, they were only human, but John couldn't help feeling disappointed. He believed in standing up for others, even when it was hard, and he hoped his actions might inspire someone else to do the same someday. A young woman named Emily Davis, who had been sitting near the front of the bus, leaned forward eagerly. "Are you really John Cena?" she asked again, her tone filled with excitement. This time John didn't try to brush it off. He nodded with a small smile, knowing there was no point in denying it anymore. "Yeah, I am," he admitted. "But today I'm just another guy on the bus." His humility only made the passengers admire him more. A ripple of applause broke out, spreading from one end of the bus to the other. Some people clapped enthusiastically, while others simply nodded in appreciation. Margaret joined in, wiping away her tears as she smiled at John. "You're not just another guy," she told him firmly. "You're a hero." John chuckled, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm just glad I could help," he said, shrugging modestly. Despite his fame, he had always preferred to keep a low profile, especially in moments like this. He didn't want the focus to be on him. He wanted people to remember the importance of kindness and courage instead. As the bus continued its route, conversations bubbled up around them. Passengers who had barely acknowledged each other before were now chatting animatedly, sharing their thoughts about what had happened. One man remarked how rare it was to see someone step in like that, while a teenage girl expressed her disbelief that Jake had backed down so quickly. "That guy looked scary," she said, glancing at John. "But you weren't afraid at all." John shrugged again, his expression thoughtful. "Fear doesn't solve anything," he explained. "Sometimes you just have to trust yourself and do what's right." His words resonated with everyone on the bus, including Margaret, who listened intently. She had spent decades living quietly, avoiding conflict whenever possible. But seeing John stand up to Jake reminded her that strength came in many forms, and that even ordinary people could make a difference if they chose to act. Eventually, the bus reached Margaret's stop. She gathered her belongings slowly, her movements deliberate but steady. Before stepping off, she turned to John one last time. "Thank you again," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "You've given me something to think about today." With that, she stepped onto the sidewalk, waving goodbye as the bus pulled away. John watched her go, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. Helping Margaret had been instinctive for him. It wasn't about being recognized or celebrated. It was about doing the right thing, plain and simple. And yet, he couldn't deny that moments like these reminded him why he loved connecting with people. Whether it was through wrestling, acting, or random encounters on a city bus, he thrived on making others feel seen and valued. Back on the bus, the atmosphere remained lively. Emily Davis introduced herself to John, explaining that she was a huge fan of his work. She asked if she could take a selfie with him, and John agreed without hesitation. As word spread, several other passengers approached him politely, asking for photos or autographs. John obliged each request with a warm smile, treating everyone with the same respect and kindness he had shown Margaret. For many of the passengers, this unexpected encounter with John Cena became the highlight of their day, or maybe even their week. They talked about it long after the bus ride ended, recounting the story to friends and family. Social media played a role too. Within hours, videos and photos of the incident began circulating online, sparking conversations about heroism and the power of standing up for others. Meanwhile, Jake Malone found himself facing consequences he hadn't anticipated. Unbeknownst to him, several passengers had recorded parts of the confrontation on their phones. Those videos quickly went viral, drawing attention not only to Jake's aggressive behavior, but also to John's calm and decisive intervention. Authorities reviewed the footage and identified Jake based on his distinctive appearance. By the end of the day, he was brought in for questioning, forced to answer for his actions. Though Jake tried to downplay the incident, claiming he had only been joking around, the evidence against him was undeniable. Witnesses came forward, including Margaret, who described how terrified she had felt during the encounter. Her testimony carried significant weight, painting a vivid picture of Jake's intimidation tactics. In the end, Jake faced legal repercussions, serving as a reminder that bullying and harassment wouldn't be tolerated, even on public transportation. For Margaret, the aftermath of the event brought both reflection and gratitude. She realized how lucky she had been to have John sitting beside her that morning. If he hadn't been there, she doubted anyone else would have intervened. It made her think about the importance of community and looking out for one another. Inspired by John's example, she decided to volunteer more of her time helping others, whether it was visiting patients at the hospital or mentoring younger women in her neighborhood. As for John, the experience reinforced his belief in the impact of small acts of kindness. He often thought about Margaret and wondered how she was doing. Occasionally, he checked social media to see updates from the passengers who had shared their stories online. Each post reminded him that even in a world filled with challenges, there was always room for hope, and for heroes willing to step up when it mattered most. The bus ride may have lasted only a short while, but its effects lingered far beyond that Monday morning. For everyone involved, it served as a powerful reminder of the difference one person could make. Whether it was through physical strength, moral courage, or simple compassion, every action counted. And sometimes those actions created ripples that touched lives in ways no one could have predicted. The ripple effects of that morning's events began to spread far beyond the confines of the bus. By afternoon, videos and photos capturing the confrontation between John Cena and Jake Malone had gone viral on social media platforms. The footage was raw and unfiltered, showing every tense moment, from Jake's aggressive behavior toward Margaret Wilson to John's calm yet firm intervention. People everywhere were talking about it, sharing their thoughts and reactions in comment sections and group chats. For many viewers, the story was a mix of shock and inspiration. They were stunned by Jake's audacity, but equally amazed by John's courage. Comments poured in from all corners of the internet. Some praised John as a real-life superhero, while others expressed outrage at Jake's actions. "This is why we need more people like John Cena in the world," one user wrote. Another added, "He didn't just protect that woman, he reminded us what true strength looks like." News outlets picked up the story quickly, turning it into headlines across local and national media. Reporters scrambled to interview passengers who had been on the bus, eager to hear firsthand accounts of what had happened. Emily Davis, the young woman who had taken a selfie with John, became one of the most sought-after voices. She recounted the entire incident in vivid detail, describing how Jake had intimidated Margaret and how John had stepped in without hesitation. Her words painted a clear picture of both the danger and the heroism that unfolded during that ride. Margaret herself also spoke to reporters, though she did so reluctantly. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the sudden attention made her uncomfortable. Still, she felt it was important to share her side of the story. Sitting in her cozy living room, surrounded by family photos and knickknacks collected, over decades she described the fear she had felt when Jake grabbed her necklace. "I thought no one would help me," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "But then this stranger, stood up for me. I'll never forget that." When asked about John Cena, Margaret's eyes lit up with admiration. "He didn't just save my necklace, no," she said. "He saved my dignity. He showed me that there are still good people in this world." Her heartfelt words resonated deeply with audiences, adding another layer of emotion to the already powerful narrative. Meanwhile, Jake Malone found himself at the center of a growing storm. After being identified through the viral videos, he became the subject of intense scrutiny. Authorities questioned him about his motives, and though he tried to play down his actions as a harmless prank, the evidence told a different story. Passengers' testimonies combined with the video footage painted a damning portrait of his behavior. Legal charges were filed against him, including assault and harassment, leaving him with little room to defend himself. Jake's reputation suffered greatly as a result. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves from him, unwilling to be associated with someone labeled a bully and a criminal. His name appeared in countless articles and news segments, often accompanied by unflattering screenshots of his scowling face. For a man who prided himself on toughness and independence, the public backlash hit hard. It was a harsh lesson in accountability, one that forced him to confront the consequences of his choices. Back in Chicago, life slowly returned to normal for the other passengers who had been on the bus. Yet the memory of that morning lingered, sparking conversations about bravery, compassion, and the importance of standing up for others. Many of them realized they could have done more to intervene but hadn't known how. Seeing John Cena take action inspired them to reflect on their own roles in similar situations. "I always thought heroes were these larger-than-life figures," one passenger remarked during an interview. "But now I see that anyone can be a hero if they choose to act." John Cena, for his part, remained humble despite the outpouring of praise. When contacted by journalists, he agreed to give a brief statement, emphasizing that his actions were not extraordinary. "I'm not special," he said. "I just did what anyone should do when they see someone in trouble. We all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small." His message struck a chord with people around the globe. Social media users began sharing stories of their own acts of kindness, big and small, using hashtags like "Be the Hero" and "Stand Up for Others." Teachers incorporated the incident into classroom discussions, encouraging students to think about how they could contribute positively to their communities. Even celebrities joined in, applauding John's actions and urging their followers to follow his example. In the days that followed, Margaret received an overwhelming amount of support from strangers touched by her story. Flowers and cards arrived at her doorstep daily, each containing messages of encouragement and gratitude. One letter, written by a young girl, stood out to her. "Dear Mrs. Wilson," it read, "thank you for reminding me that even when things seem scary, there are people who will stand up for us. "You're brave, and I hope I can be like you someday." Margaret teared up reading it, realizing that her experience had inspired others to find courage in their own lives. The incident also prompted broader discussions about safety on public transportation. City officials announced plans to increase security measures on buses and trains, ensuring that passengers felt safer during their commutes. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to push for stricter laws against harassment and bullying, citing Jake's behavior as a prime example of why such reforms were necessary. While change wouldn't happen overnight, the momentum generated by the story gave hope to those fighting for a better future. As the weeks passed, John Cena continued going about his life, staying true to his values of humility and service. He declined offers for exclusive interviews or appearances related to the bus incident, preferring to let the story speak for itself. Instead, he focused on his ongoing projects, using his platform to promote causes close to his heart. Whether it was supporting military families or advocating for anti-bullying initiatives, he remained committed to making a positive impact wherever he could. Margaret, too, embraced the lessons she had learned that day. Inspired by John's selflessness, she decided to volunteer at a local community center, where she helped organize activities for seniors and children alike. Her newfound purpose brought her joy and fulfillment, proving that even after a lifetime of quiet living, it was never too late to step outside one's comfort zone. Though their paths had crossed only briefly, the bond between John and Margaret endured. They exchanged a few messages through social media, expressing mutual gratitude for the role they had played in each other's lives. Margaret often joked that she owed John a lifetime supply of cookies, while John teased her about becoming an honorary wrestling fan. Their friendship, born out of an unlikely situation, served as a testament to the connections that could form when people chose kindness over indifference. Looking back, it was remarkable how much had changed because of a single event on a city bus. A random act of aggression had been met with an equally random act of heroism, setting off a chain reaction that touched countless lives. From Margaret's renewed sense of purpose to the global conversations sparked by the incident, the impact was undeniable. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth, that even in moments of darkness, light could shine through, if only someone was willing to let it. For John Cena, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of leading by example. He knew he couldn't solve every problem or fight every battle, but he could inspire others to try. And for Margaret Wilson, it was a reminder that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was ask for help. As the city of Chicago moved forward, the story of the biker, the elderly woman, and the unexpected hero lived on, woven into its fabric like a thread of hope. It was a tale of resilience, compassion, and the enduring belief that even in a crowded bus full of strangers, humanity could still find a way to prevail. The days turned into weeks, and life in Chicago carried on as usual. The bustling streets, the honking of car horns, and the chatter of people going about their daily routines seemed unchanged. Yet, beneath the surface, something had shifted. The story of what happened on that bus continued to resonate with people, sparking conversations and inspiring actions that reached far beyond the city limits. Margaret Wilson found herself adjusting to her newfound role as an accidental symbol of resilience. She hadn't asked for any of this. She was just a grandmother who liked quiet mornings and cherished memories of her late husband. But now, strangers recognized her when she walked through her neighborhood or visited the grocery store. Some would stop her to say how much her story had touched them, while others simply smiled warmly, as if silently thanking her for being brave enough to share it. At first, the attention made Margaret uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and she worried that people might think she was seeking fame or recognition. But over time, she came to understand that her story mattered not because of her, but because of what it represented. The idea that even in moments of fear and vulnerability, there was always hope that someone would step forward, no matter how unlikely they seemed. Her volunteer work at the community center became a source of joy and fulfillment. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she helped organize activities for seniors and children, bringing generations together in ways she never imagined possible. The kids loved her stories about growing up in a simpler time, while the older adults appreciated her wisdom and humor. Together, they created a space where everyone felt welcome and valued, a small but meaningful contribution to a world that often felt divided. One day, as Margaret sat in the center's cozy lounge area, surrounded by laughter and conversation, she realized how much she had grown since that fateful morning on the bus. Before, she had been content to live quietly, avoiding conflict and keeping to herself. Now she understood the importance of stepping outside her comfort zone and making connections with others. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. Meanwhile, John Cena returned to his busy schedule, balancing his career with his passion for helping others. He didn't seek out opportunities to talk about the bus incident, but he didn't shy away from it either. When fans approached him at events or sent messages online expressing gratitude, he took the time to respond thoughtfully. "I'm glad my actions meant something to you," he would write. "But remember, anyone can be a hero. You just have to choose to act." His humility only deepened people's admiration for him. They saw him not just as a celebrity or a wrestler, but as someone who genuinely cared about making the world a better place. Inspired by his example, many began looking for ways to make a difference in their own communities. A group of teenagers started a campaign to clean up local parks, while a teacher organized workshops to teach students about standing up against bullying. Even small gestures like holding the door open for someone or offering a kind word became more common as people embraced the idea that kindness mattered. In the midst of all this positivity, Jake Malone faced a very different reality. The legal consequences of his actions weighed heavily on him, both financially and emotionally. Facing charges of assault and harassment forced him to confront the damage he had caused, not just to Margaret, but to everyone who had witnessed his behavior. For the first time in his life, he found himself questioning the choices he had made and the person he had become. Jake's journey wasn't easy. Losing friends and facing public shame left him feeling isolated and bitter. But slowly, he began to see that blaming others wouldn't change anything. If he wanted a second chance, he would have to earn it. With the help of a court-appointed counselor, he started attending anger management classes and working to understand why he acted the way he did. It was a long and difficult process, filled with setbacks and moments of doubt. But Jake knew he had no choice but to keep trying. One afternoon, as he sat in a session with his counselor, Jake reflected on the bus incident. He remembered the look of fear in Margaret's eyes and the calm determination in John Cena's voice. Those images haunted him, but they also motivated him to change. "I don't want to be that guy anymore," he admitted during one of their discussions. His counselor nodded encouragingly, reminding him that growth took time and effort. "You're already taking steps in the right direction," she said. "That's what matters." Back in the wider world, the ripple effects of the bus incident continued to spread. Social media played a key role in amplifying its message, with hashtags like #Stand Up for Others and Everyday Heroes trending for weeks. People shared their own stories of courage and kindness, creating a virtual tapestry of hope and inspiration. Teachers incorporated the story into lesson plans, using it to teach students about empathy and responsibility. Even corporations got involved, sponsoring campaigns to promote safety and respect in public spaces. City officials took notice too. In response to the incident, they announced plans to increase security measures on buses and trains, including additional cameras and trained personnel. Advocacy groups pushed for stricter laws against harassment and bullying, citing Jake's behavior as a stark reminder of why such reforms were necessary. While progress was slow, the momentum generated by the story gave hope to those fighting for a safer, kinder society. For Margaret, the changes happening around her were heartening. She saw how one moment of bravery could inspire so many others to take action. At the same time, she remained grounded, focusing on the things that truly mattered to her: family, friends, and the simple joys of everyday life. Her granddaughter, who had recovered fully from her surgery, often joked that Margaret was becoming a celebrity. "Just don't let it go to your head, Grandma," she teased. Margaret laughed, knowing she had no intention of letting fame or anything else change who she was. John Cena, too, stayed true to himself. Despite the praise and recognition, he remained humble and focused on his mission to inspire others. Whether it was through his wrestling career, his acting roles, or his charitable efforts, he continued to use his platform to spread messages of strength, perseverance, and kindness. He believed deeply in the power of storytelling to connect people and create change, and he hoped that his actions, both big and small, would encourage others to do the same. As the months passed, the story of the biker, the elderly woman, and the unexpected hero became more than just a viral moment. It evolved into a lasting reminder of the impact one person could have on the world. From Margaret's renewed sense of purpose to the global conversation sparked by the incident, its legacy endured, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. Looking back, it was clear that none of this would have happened without the courage of two individuals: John Cena, who chose to stand up for what was right, and Margaret Wilson, who refused to give up in the face of fear. Together, they proved that even in a crowded bus full of strangers, humanity could still find a way to shine through. And in doing so, they reminded everyone that heroes weren't defined by capes or superpowers. They were defined by the choices they made and the lives they touched. Though their paths had crossed only briefly, the bond between John and Margaret remained strong. They exchanged occasional messages, sharing updates on their lives and expressing gratitude for the role they had played in each other's journeys. Margaret often joked that she owed John a lifetime supply of cookies, while John teased her about becoming an honorary wrestling fan. Their friendship, born out of an unlikely situation, served as a testament to the connections that could form when people chose kindness over indifference. In the end, the story of that Monday morning on the bus was more than just a tale of confrontation and courage. It was a celebration of the human spirit, the ability to rise above fear, to stand up for others, and to believe in the power of goodness. It was a reminder that even in a world full of challenges, there was always room for hope, and for heroes willing to step up when it mattered most. As the months rolled on, the story of the bus incident began to fade from the headlines, but its impact continued to ripple through the lives of those involved, and countless others who had been inspired by it. The city of Chicago moved forward, its streets still buzzing with energy, its people still navigating the ups and downs of daily life. Yet for Margaret Wilson, John Cena, and even Jake Malone, the events of that morning had left an indelible mark. Margaret's volunteer work at the community center became a cornerstone of her life. She spent her days surrounded by laughter, conversation, and the simple joys of connecting with others. Her presence brought warmth to the room, and her stories, whether about her late husband or the time she met John Cena on a bus, never failed to captivate her audience. One day, as she sat teaching a group of children how to knit, one of the kids looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mrs. Wilson," he asked, "what's the bravest thing you've ever done?" Margaret paused, her knitting, needles resting in her lap. For a moment she thought about the bus ride, the fear she had felt, the tears she had shed, and the courage it had taken to hold on to her necklace. But then she realized something. Bravery wasn't just about standing up to someone like Jake Malone. It was also about choosing to keep going, to find joy and purpose even after hardship. "The bravest thing I've ever done," she said softly, "is deciding to be kind, no matter what happens." Her words stayed with the children long after the lesson ended, sparking conversations among them about what kindness meant and how they could practice it in their own lives. Margaret didn't know it at the time, but her answer planted a seed, a small but powerful idea that would grow in the hearts of those kids as they grew older. John Cena, meanwhile, continued to live his life with the same humility and dedication that had defined him before the bus incident. He traveled for work, appeared at events, and spent time with family and friends, always striving to lead by example. Though he occasionally encountered people who wanted to talk about what had happened that day, he never grew tired of hearing how it had inspired them. "It's not about me," he would say with a smile. "It's about remembering that we all have the power to make a difference." One evening, during a charity event in New York City, John found himself reflecting on the past few months. He, thought about Margaret and how her quiet strength had touched so many lives. He thought about Jake and the challenges he faced as he tried to turn his life around. And he thought about the strangers on the bus, their fear, their hesitation, and ultimately their gratitude. It reminded him of something he had always believed, that every action, no matter how small, mattered. After the event, a young man approached John, his hands trembling slightly as he held out a piece of paper. "Mr. Cena," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story, it helped me realize I can stand up for myself and others." John took the note, read the heartfelt message written inside, and shook the young man's hand firmly. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "Just promise me you'll keep standing up." For Jake Malone, the road to redemption was long and difficult, but he refused to give up. The anger management classes taught him new ways to handle frustration, while therapy sessions helped him unpack the pain and insecurity that had fueled his behavior for so many years. Slowly, he began rebuilding relationships with the people he had pushed away, starting with his younger sister, Lisa. She had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself, and her unwavering support gave him the strength to keep moving forward. One afternoon, as Jake walked through a park near his apartment, he noticed a group of kids playing soccer. They laughed and shouted, their faces glowing with happiness. Watching them reminded him of the innocence he had once taken for granted, and the responsibility he now carried to be better. He decided then and there to volunteer as a coach for a local youth sports program, hoping to use his experiences to guide others. "If I can help even one kid avoid making the mistakes I did," he told Lisa later that night, "it'll be worth it." The changes in Jake's life weren't immediate, nor were they easy. There were days when he felt overwhelmed by guilt or doubted his ability to change. But each step he took brought him closer to becoming the person he wanted to be. A person defined not by his past mistakes, but by the effort he put into creating a better future. Back in Chicago, the city itself seemed to carry the spirit of that fateful morning. Public transportation systems implemented new safety measures, including emergency buttons and increased security personnel, ensuring passengers felt safer during their commutes. Advocacy groups used the incident as a rallying cry, pushing for stricter laws against harassment and bullying. Schools incorporated lessons about bystander intervention into their curriculums, teaching students the importance of speaking up when they saw someone in need. Even social media played a role in keeping the story alive. People continued to share their own acts of kindness, big and small, using hashtags like Be the Hero and Everyday Courage. These posts served as reminders that heroism wasn't limited to grand gestures. It was often found in the quiet, everyday moments when someone chose to care. As winter approached, Margaret received an invitation to speak at a community event, honoring local heroes. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she deserved such recognition. But her granddaughter encouraged her, reminding her of the countless lives she had touched simply by sharing her story. On the night of the event, Margaret stood on stage, her silver hair catching the light as she addressed the crowd. "I'm not a hero," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm just a woman who learned that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's standing up for yourself. Other times it's asking for help, or being willing to give it." Her speech earned a standing ovation, but more importantly, it inspired those in attendance to think about the ways they could contribute to their communities. A teenager sitting in the audience decided to start volunteering at a homeless shelter. An elderly man resolved to check in on his neighbors more often. And a young mother promised herself to teach her children the value of kindness and empathy. For John Cena, the culmination of the story came unexpectedly. While attending a wrestling event in Chicago, he was surprised to see Margaret in the front row, holding a sign that read, "Thank you for being my hero." After the match, he invited her backstage, where they embraced warmly. "I should be thanking you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You remind me why I do what I do." Their reunion was captured on camera and shared widely, reigniting interest in the story. Once again, people marveled at the unlikely friendship between a retired schoolteacher and a global superstar. But more than that, they celebrated the message. It represented that anyone, regardless of age, background, or circumstance, could make a difference. In the end, the legacy of that Monday morning on the bus was far greater than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just about stopping a bully or protecting an elderly woman. It was about the connections forged between strangers, the courage found in moments of fear, and the belief that even in a world full of challenges, goodness could prevail. Margaret, John, and Jake, all three had been changed by the experience, each in their own way. Margaret discovered a newfound sense of purpose, proving that it was never too late to make a difference. John reaffirmed his commitment to inspiring others, showing that true strength lay in lifting people up rather than tearing them down. And Jake, though still on his journey, learned that redemption was possible if one was willing to fight for it. As the years passed, the story endured, not as a distant memory, but as a living testament to the power of humanity. It reminded everyone who heard it that heroes weren't born, they were made, one choice at a time. And sometimes those choices happened in the most ordinary places, like a crowded city bus where a single act of courage could spark a chain reaction of hope, kindness, and change.